I still remember the night I agreed to house sit for my best friend Trevor. He'd just bought a new place, a big old house on the edge of town that seemed to sit in the middle of nowhere. The nearest neighbors were a good mile or two away. It was one of those houses that had a kind of eerie charm, a huge Victorian with creaky wooden floors, towering ceilings, and more rooms than anyone could need. Trevor had told me he'd gotten it for a steal, but even he admitted it gave him the creeps. That Friday night, he handed me the keys, slapped me on the back, and said, "Just keep an eye on things. I'll be back by tomorrow afternoon." I laughed it off at the time. I'd grown up on horror movies and ghost stories, and I wasn't one to scare easily. Plus, I figured it'd be an easy night with Netflix, snacks, and maybe even a good chance to catch up on some sleep. As soon as I pulled into the long gravel driveway, though, the vibe changed. The house loomed in the darkness, with only one porch light flickering faintly. Inside, I turned on as many lights as I could, hoping to chase away the shadows. It didn't help much. The house was just too big, with far too many dark corners and crevices. I settled into the living room, where Trevor had left a stack of DVDs and a bag of chips. After flipping through his collection, I decided on a classic horror movie. Maybe it was a bad choice, but I thought it'd make the night interesting. An hour into the movie, I started hearing noises. At first, it was subtle, just faint creaks from upstairs. I told myself it was an old house settling, but the creaks grew louder, sounding like footsteps slowly moving from room to room. I muted the TV, straining to listen. Nothing. I let out a nervous laugh, feeling a bit ridiculous for letting my imagination get the best of me. Then came a soft tap, tap, tap at one of the back windows, the kind of sound you'd hear if someone lightly drummed their fingers against the glass. My heart skipped a beat. I turned around, expecting to see something or someone, but there was just the darkness outside. Taking a deep breath, I convinced myself it was probably a tree branch brushing against the window, though there wasn't a single tree close enough to do that. I went to check anyway, just to ease my nerves. The window was completely clear, but as I turned to head back to the living room, I saw it, a dark figure standing at the end of the hallway, just beyond the dim glow of the kitchen light. My stomach twisted into a knot. The figure was tall, unnaturally thin, with its head tilted at an odd angle, as if it was staring straight at me, even though I couldn't make out any eyes. I blinked, and it was gone. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined it. Back in the living room, I locked every window and door, reassuring myself that everything was secure. But I was on edge, and every little sound seemed amplified in the silence of the night. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of an old clock in the hallway, and footsteps coming down the stairs. This time, the footsteps weren't subtle. They were deliberate, heavy, echoing through the empty rooms above. I grabbed my phone, debating whether to call Trevor and tell him his new place was definitely haunted. But part of me didn't want to admit how freaked out I was. I took a deep breath, trying to muster up some courage, and headed toward the staircase. "Hello?" I called out, feeling a bit foolish. Of course, there was no answer. I took a few steps up the stairs, and that's when I saw it. A faint shadow moving at the top landing. My blood ran cold. It looked like the same tall figure I'd seen before, but now it was more distinct, almost solid. I backed down, my heart pounding as I watched the figure slowly turn and disappear down the hallway. I was frozen for a moment, trying to process what I'd just seen. Then I did something I'd never done before. I actually turned around and ran out the front door. I stood in the driveway, breathing heavily, staring up at the house, half expecting to see someone or something watching me from one of the windows. But there was nothing, just darkness. I told myself to pull it together, that I was letting the empty house mess with my mind. After a few minutes, I reluctantly went back inside, locking the door behind me. As I headed back to the living room, I heard it again, that soft tap, 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 but this time it was coming from the front door. I stopped, staring at the door, half expecting someone to knock, but instead, the door handle slowly started to turn. I could see it twisting, almost like someone on the other side was trying to open it, but they didn't have the strength to push it fully open. Trevor? I called out, hoping maybe he'd come back early to play a prank on me, but there was no answer. I watched as the handle turned back to its original position and the tapping stopped. Feeling like I was losing my mind, I turned on every single light in the house, hoping it would banish the shadows and whatever was lurking in them. I sat on the couch, wide-eyed, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline, waiting for the first sign of morning. Every so often, I'd hear faint footsteps from somewhere upstairs, but I refused to check anymore. I just sat there, heart racing, counting down the hours until dawn. Finally, as the first light of day crept through the windows, the house seemed to settle. The noises stopped, and a strange calm washed over the place. I waited until I saw sunlight fully streaming in before I dared to move. When Trevor returned that afternoon, I blurted everything out, expecting him to laugh, to say I was overreacting. But his face went pale. He told me he'd been hearing strange noises too, and that the previous owners had sold the place quickly, saying they'd felt unwelcome there. That was the last time I ever set foot in Trevor's house. He still lives there, but we don't talk about that night. Sometimes, when we're hanging out, he'll mention strange things happening, doors opening on their own, footsteps in empty rooms, but he always shrugs it off with a nervous laugh. I don't know what's in that house, and I don't want to find out. All I know is that whatever it was watching me that night, and I hope I never feel that kind of presence again.